When you think of the Indian subcontinent, what are the first things that come to mind? Perhaps the usual beautiful temples, maybe lovely sunsets, jungles, deserts, or maybe the fact that the Himalayas are there. Perhaps one of the things that would not come to mind at all is a lost civilization. That's right, on the Indian subcontinent there once existed a highly advanced early civilization around the same time as our civilizations that we've been going over in Mesopotamia. This, my friends, is the Indus River Valley Civilization. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen all over the world, and welcome back to A History of Humanity as part of the Grand Portfolio. And today we're not returning to Mesopotamia, we're done with the Sumerian city-states for now. However, we're going to study instead a civilization that was around at the same time or a similar time frame to when the Sumerian city-states emerged and when Sargon built his empire. And speaking of building things, let's go and get knowledge out there. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and let's get this thing out across the airwaves. Now, without further ado, we begin our story on the Indian subcontinent, more specifically along the banks of the Indus River. Now, in modern times, this area, well, the area the Indus River peoples inhabited, now lies sort of on the border between India and Pakistan. We're talking more specifically northwestern India and southeastern Pakistan. It even stretches all the way down to the coast of the Indian Ocean. There you go, we've already got one thing. These guys probably had international trade. So, the thing to note about the Indus River Valley Civilization is not much is known about it. Still today, almost 5,000 years later, we know very little about this mysterious civilization that sprung up around the Indus River. In 1921, when a Mr. R.D. Banerjee began his excavation of the area known as Mohenjo-Daro and also later Harappa, there was no evidence, no knowledge, no nothing, not even a mention of the Indus River Valley Civilization. So it probably adds fuel to the fire of the whole mystical, dreamy perception of ancient lost civilizations. And yes, technically, this was a lost civilization. For in the year around circa 200 AD, devotees of Buddhism, a way of life which had at that point only recently swept through southern and eastern Asia, had begun building a monastery on the site at Mohenjo-Daro, using bricks left over from ruins that had been built by peoples that were unknown even to them. Now, we're talking, these Buddhist devotees built their monastery around 1800 years ago now. They are closer to when the Indus River Valley Civilization was at its height, and yet it seems not even they knew who these peoples were. For they just simply perhaps saw these ruins as a convenient brick depository for which they could use to build their brand new monastery. So the big question is, how did a civilization seemingly so advanced, so well planned and so well designed in its urbanisation, its city planning, its infrastructure, simply crash and burn and just fall out of our historical records for centuries, millennia even? We have only known about this civilization since the early 1920s. So you sitting there and scratching your head thinking, how the bloody hell is this guy doing an episode on the Indus River Valley Civilization when there's bugger all to come up with about it? Well, interesting question. I am struggling myself here. Today, I am simply stating what we know. And maybe we can put the pieces of the puzzle together and perhaps begin to build an idea of what this civilization was, what potential impact it had upon the world, if any at all, and just what made it crumble so badly that it's literally a whisper in the footnote of what could be nothing more than a myth. Well, today we're going to find out. So the troubling thing is with a lost civilization is you may have to ask yourself, where on earth can we start? Well, like last time, we have to go back a very, very long way. Let's start with one thing that happened more or less on every continent at one point or another. One thing that we've learned about already, that of the Neolithic Revolution, around 10,000 BC, when man stopped running and started sitting. Boy, wasn't that the best idea in history. Maybe not so much now. Oh well. Well, at least we have a starting point. Maybe something basic where the people who would eventually settle alongside the Indus River simply swapped their hiking boots and their running shoes for the sofa and a nice cup of tea. Don't take that literally. Before you start calling me out on it, it is just a joke. Albeit a bit of a rubbish one. Well, I was really no comedian. Anyway though, so as for the civilization itself, when did it begin exactly? Well, like with the Akkadian Empire and the Sumerian city-states, I can't give you a definitive date. I can't give you an exact year. Instead, it's more of a guesstimate at best by historians based on the evidence we've found in the communities that sprang up alongside the Indus River. There is evidence to suggest in this area instead that basic settlements began to appear circa 4000 BCE, so we're talking about 6,000 years ago, roughly. Bloody long time, don't forget. This was one of the first civilizations to appear in world history, remember. In fact, interestingly enough, the oldest known ploughed field in world history is at Kalibangan in the Indus Valley, dating to around 3000 BCE. And there is even evidence to suggest in this field that basic scratch ploughs were used, perhaps pulled by recently domesticated oxen. So, we know that the Indus peoples were advanced enough to make use of agriculture, growing crops, of course, after the Neolithic Revolution. So we know that they had settled down around the Indus River Valley about 4000 BC, 6,000 years ago. And that they were using scratch ploughs in their agriculture, perhaps as early as 3000 BC. This is more or less, with the Indus River Valley Civilization, as good a starting block as you're going to get. Not exactly an Olympic quality starting block, but any bit of wood can be a starting block if you use your imagination. Anyway, moving on. After setting foot on the starting block, you're gonna have to stay with me here, because the Indus River Valley Civilization, almost it seems, took on more or less, let's say, a Usain Bolt method of taking to the track. It got off its starting block and it flew down the 100 metres. Okay, all Olympic referencing aside, this could be due to the fact that urbanisation in the Indus River Valley Civilization began around the time that the Indus peoples were using scratch ploughs with domesticated oxen to begin growing crops and setting up an agricultural system. A simpler way of gathering food, which would allow them more time, instead of focusing just on survival, to go off and do other things. And so that's where city planning, urbanisation, begins to take hold. Because once you've got the difficult job of finding your food, hunting your food, catching your food, preparing your food, and then finally sitting down to eat your food out the way, what have you got time for? Well, That's where this brand new thing called agriculture comes in, and suddenly we got time for thinking, baby. So, when you're building a brand new civilization, and at first it's just nothing more than perhaps a few simple huts clustered together, more and more people would start to join you. And eventually you realise you can't just live in this crowded mishmash of huts forever. So that's where people would start to think about urbanisation, a kind of planning to make everything more neat and accessible, as we see at the ruins in places like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa to this day. There are well-planned streets, block buildings, lanes, roads where people could walk, traders could pull their carts, and people could sell goods. Very much like the cities and towns we have to this day. So you could say that in a very small way, the Indus peoples had a tiny impact on the world we see around us today. Now, with urbanisation out of the way, well, for the time being, let's talk about connections, contacts, because everybody loves to be social, even the ancients. Now, the interesting thing to note is that there have been sites accredited to the Indus peoples dotted along the northwestern coast of India, going further inland, and also in parts of southern Pakistan. So that brings about the question, did these peoples trade with anybody? The interesting thing about the timestamp of the Indus River Valley Civilization is that it existed between 4000 and 2000 BCE, roughly. And, funnily enough, another civilization that from previous episodes we know existed around the same time. The Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia, and later Sargon's Akkadian Empire. So, did these people have contact, and did they trade with one another? Now, to go into more specifics, there have been sites accredited to the Indus River Civilization, dotted along or near the coasts of southern Pakistan and northwestern India, near places close to the coastline or on the coastline, such as that of Dor, Balakot, Karachi and Lothal. This could suggest then that maybe the Indus peoples had port cities and therefore had mastered the art of travelling and trading by sea. And this is where you could have evidence for international trade. So the big question is, how did the Indus peoples get their income? How did they become wealthy enough to plan and build these big urbanised cities with roadways and square-shaped buildings like we have today? Well, this is where it gets even more interesting. That's right, even more interesting than having a beach location. Blimey, wouldn't that drive up the real estate prices? Anyway, so there have even been sites found accredited to the Indus peoples just scraping by what is now modern-day Afghanistan to the north. And what specifically can be mined and processed in Afghanistan? Silver and lapis lazuli, a precious metal and a precious type of gemstone, two materials of which could fetch a very high price on international markets. And our other customers for the Indus peoples being the Mesopotamians. But I hear you say, is there any evidence for this, or is it just a conspiracy theory? Well, look at the world around you and what the hell isn't classed as a conspiracy theory these days. So, this little tidbit of information comes from the Curse of Agaday, written after the fall of the Akkadian Empire but from the perspective of the reign of Naram Sin, one of Sargon I's descendants. Quote, "The Meluhites, the men of the Black Land, bring to Naram Sin all kinds of exotic wares." Close quote. This inscription was dated to around 2000 BC, when the Akkadian Empire and the Indus civilization coexisted roughly. So there you have it, an almighty empire and an ancient civilization that we know very little about had contact and traded with one another. Two trading partners. Perhaps, maybe even, you could say this was the first trade deal in world history. Well, I say that a bit loosely, but anyway, did you catch a certain bit of information within that quote? Meluhite, Black Land. Maybe Black Land to the Mesopotamians was something mysterious, something unknown. Perhaps because very little was known about them except that there were people there. But Meluhite, that's interesting. So it seems that the Mesopotamians, the Akkadians, had a name for this mysterious civilization. Meluha, meaning Black Land in the Akkadian language. And it's said today that news travels far and fast, even in our modern age. So maybe then it was true that if emissaries from the Indus River Valley Civilization came to offer exotic wares and gifts to the great emperor Naram Sin of Akkad, then the range of communication between these two flourishing civilizations may have been rather efficient indeed. And don't forget that the Mesopotamians produced tablets written in cuneiform detailing one thing in particular: accountancy, keeping track of purchases and sales, something that traders and merchants would be heavily involved in. And in the Indus River Civilization in Meluha, we have found tablets inscribed with a unique language, not cuneiform, something that archaeologists and historians refer to as the Indus Script. Some of these tablets even detail, as well as writing, pictures of animals. Perhaps, not only in gemstones and precious metals, the Indus peoples perhaps maybe traded in agricultural goods, like the Mesopotamians did. But it could be one of these tablets in particular has on it the picture of what looks to be an oxen alongside some Indus script. Maybe it's a religious tablet, or maybe it's a record of a transaction. Perhaps somebody from Mesopotamia or somebody within Meluha wanted to buy some oxen. But the really tricky thing is with this is that for now we don't know, for the Indus script has never been successfully translated. But at the same time, don't forget that this civilization was only discovered properly in the 1920s. Until then, it was just a lost civilization, just some funny looking hills as you walked by. Even now, we don't have detailed records of anything such as kings, dukes, mayors, tribal leaders of these cities and towns all along the Indus River network. We don't know who ruled them, we don't know who led them, and we don't know who founded these cities. And speaking of these cities, it seems for their time they were incredibly advanced. For they had methods of storing vast quantities of water to be used in times of drought. It's been discovered that a certain ruin at the site of Mohenjo-Daro looks to be a great bath of some kind, a facility for storing water. Perhaps it seems maybe that the Indus peoples, the Meluhites, had an idea of cleanliness, perhaps public health. It's even been suggested that some of the buildings, there's a room in particular in a lot of the ruins found that looks to be a type of bathroom, meaning that these people perhaps had drainage systems and water distribution systems, effective ways of dishing out usable water in households to a population. Now, this kind of urban planning and architectural wonder would not be seen again on this scale until the era of Caesar and Brutus and Cleopatra. Yes, not until around 2,000 years after the civilization's fall would this level of engineering on such a large scale be seen. So, we come to perhaps our final question. What happened to them? Where did they go? For a civilization as advanced, as well planned, and as wealthy as that of Meluha, how did it just collapse so badly that we barely even remember it? It's more like a dream these days, something you just wake up from in the morning and within seconds doubt if it ever happened. So, in the question of Meluha, what killed it? Even today, even when speaking about its end, we can never truly be, for now, 100% sure what the fate of Meluha had been. So, let's discuss the possible ways, the theories in which this great civilization came to an end. So by around 2000 BC, we have a fully fledged civilization in the Indus River Valley. It controls all the waterways that are to be found within this area in parts of modern-day Pakistan and India. It has coastal cities, trading ports, and even has connections and ties with the Akkadian Empire in the Mesopotamian riverlands. So, you can probably tell that for the Indus peoples, for the Meluhites, things are going quite well. And then 1800 BC rolls around. Not the exact year, this is a rough guess. A careful estimation by historians and archaeologists as to when the Indus River Valley Civilization began to decline. You'll notice too that around this time was the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. Well, in fact, it was more like a couple of hundred years before, but we're not far off the mark here. So, circa 1800 BC, the Indus River Valley peoples, the Meluhites, have lost perhaps their only and greatest trading partner, the Akkadian Empire. Bang goes that instant source of income, bang goes the wealth, trade, accountancy, everything gone. There would have perhaps still been internal trade, but external trade is really where your money comes in. So, with nobody to sell to, the Meluhites have no income. And with that, they have nothing, or next to nothing, to pay their soldiers. Their guards that they employ to protect their borders from perhaps invading nomadic tribes seeking to make some quick cash. So, as you'll see as we go throughout history, if you don't pay your soldiers and you don't pay your mercenaries, they either abandon their posts or they just full on revolt. Whether they did or not for the Indus River, we will never truly know, because as I said, the Indus River Script remains undeciphered to this day. So, that's one possible theory for how it may have ended. The soldiers, with no pay and no income, perhaps abandoned their post or revolted against any rulers that were in the cities. And so, as we've seen with the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, undefended borders are like rabbits in a field, and outsiders, nomadic tribes, rivals, any potential threat is a fox. And now the foxes begin to circle the field, picking their targets. So possible invasion is one way the Indus River Valley Civilization could have ended. There has actually been archaeological evidence found in the ruins around the Indus River Valley that indicate that maybe there was an invasion by an outside force. For example, during the 1940s, an archaeologist by the name of Mortimer Wheeler discovered 39 human skeletons at the site where Mohenjo-Daro is today. 39 skeletons. All together, seemingly in the same area, which could suggest that maybe they were struck down by attacking forces. It's also been discovered that some valuables were hidden in the floors of some of the buildings that stand as ruins today. Question is though, what were these people running from? Who were they attacked by? Or if you're the superstitious type, what were they attacked by? Again, it's just another mystery. Invaders is always a popular theory as to how a civilization collapses, but let's go into the more boring ones now. I mean, come on, who doesn't like a bit of stabby when they read their history? Oh god, did that sound morbid? Anyway, so another way potentially in which this civilization could have collapsed is that, don't forget, India and Pakistan today sit in a somewhat drier and hotter part of the world than what I'm used to sitting here right now. Which means perhaps that some of these waterways that the Indus River cities and towns relied heavily upon perhaps dried up. Maybe there was a sustained period of drought. Now, for a civilization that depends heavily on trade through not just precious gemstones, but agriculture as the base of its economy, and then you experience a long drought, you're going to have some problems. First of all, you start digging into your excesses, into your grain stores. You start using up your reserves. Suddenly, you have nothing to sell. Not much to trade with except gemstones. And gemstones alone would not be able to cut it. It seems around the same time as well, weights that were used for taxing, accountancy, and trade with other powers such as the Akkadian Empire seem to fall out of use. And so, with their economic base gone, what is there to maintain the cities? Who is there to pay the people to build these magnificent structures, to maintain them, to keep them going? And what do people do when suddenly an area becomes troublesome, perhaps by war or economic ruin? They simply leave. And so gradually, by around 1700 BC, all of the towns and cities that once made up the Great Meluha, a mysterious civilization to us even today, slowly emptied, collecting dust. until they were not even more than a memory on the Indian subcontinent. So, when talking about the legacy of the Indus River Valley Civilization, what kind of impact did it have on the world for us today? Seeing as we know so little, not much can be said. However though, it is theorised that part of the Indus River culture's legacy and existence still lives on in some small way. It is theorised at least that in the Hindu pantheon, a religion which is still practiced widely on the Indian subcontinent to this day, that some of the gods and deities within this particular religion may have originated with the Indus peoples. There's also been evidence to suggest that the Aryans, Indo-European tribes who later settled alongside the Indus River long after Meluhha had crumbled, took up religious practices that the Indus peoples themselves once undertook. And one particular feature of modern Indian society, well, more modern Indian society, that of the caste system, can be traced back to roughly around the same time that the Aryans, the Indo-Europeans, migrated to the Indus River Valley. Maybe, perhaps, they copied the Indus peoples before them. Maybe these migrants who came in did have for at least a little while some contact with the Indus peoples, with the Meluhites. And maybe it seems something that great, something that could build these mysterious structures all around them, simply had to be continued. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. The Indus River Civilization, or at least what we know of it, and the information we have so far. But still, as far as the Indus Civilization is concerned, watch this space. For you never know, in years to come, more information may be dug up about them. And perhaps one day, finally, we may unravel the last mysteries of a civilization that, until less than a century ago, was completely unknown to us. For now though, it's time for me to head off. Thank you so much for listening. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell for notifications. Until next time though, ladies and gentlemen, this is Lewis of the Grand Portfolio, signing off.